Welcome back. What was the intent of Docks versus Glocks, and how did it come about in the first place? In 2011, the Firearm Owners Privacy Act was signed into law. It made it illegal for doctors to ask patients if they own guns. In 2012, a federal judge ruled the law unconstitutional, but an appeals court decision reversed that. 2 weeks ago, the 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in Atlanta concluded the law is a violation of a doctor's First Amendment right to freedom of speech. Today, a state House member and senator filed legislation to repeal the law altogether. So why should this matter to you? Joining us for more on this topic is Dr. Matthew Thomas, a board-certified psychiatrist with the First Physicians Group, Dr. Wes Ruffin, an emergency physician at Sarasota Memorial Hospital, and Jeff Young, a Sarasota-based private attorney who has become known as the gun lawyer for his handling of Second Amendment cases. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank
you.
So
first, I want to address the two doctors and just ask you, is this something, regardless of this law, that you would ever ask your patients? Would you ask them, do you own a gun?
I actually do. I'm a psychiatrist, and as you can imagine, many of the individuals who may be admitted or brought to the hospital generally do so because they're depressed. They're depressed, or maybe they're agitated, maybe they're manic. In some cases, they're delusional. For some individuals, they're intoxicated, say things when they're upset, engage in behaviors they may not when they're intoxicated. But all of it points to some degree of impulsivity, some increased degree of risk. So for me, and my patients, for the most part, most of the major issues that I see at the hospital do involve safety concerns and a degree of concern. For those individuals, I would ask about firearms or their family members.
And of course, your specialty is a little bit different than maybe someone in family practice. So
yes.
Was this law something that affected your ability to do your job, do you think?
I don't believe so. The FOPA actually provided exemptions when there was reasonable clinical concern regarding safety. So in that sense, it did not impact my practice specifically.
And Dr. Ruffin, what are your thoughts? Would you ever ask a patient this in the first place?
Well, yes, and in the emergency room, we're also presented with some of the same situations that Dr. Thomas has mentioned, patients who come in intoxicated, needing a psychiatric evaluation, needing us to determine, are they safe to return home? One of the questions that is important to ask is, are you suicidal? And if they are suicidal, or even if they're not but have been in the past, it's important to know what access do they have to the items they could use to possibly harm themselves. That includes drugs and firearms. So yes, in my practice clinically, yes, but also as a pediatrician, I am board certified in pediatrics and worked in primary care as well. It's important in that situation for pediatricians to be able to use that question. Ask parents, are there guns at home because of safety issues involving children, the same way as possible toxins, chemicals, other poisons that can be in the house. It's important for us to know that so we can appropriately guide parents on keeping children safe.
And Jeff, you deal with Second Amendment cases, so what are your thoughts, first of all, for the original law and then it being overturned as of now?
Well, my thoughts about the overturn, as I'm probably going to surprise some people here, but I actually agree with that ruling. I do believe it's a First Amendment right for the doctors to ask whatever questions they want to ask a patient, just like any other business or any other free market establishment out there. They're free to ask questions. As a patient, you're free to tell them to pound sand, I'm not going to answer your questions, and you can go find a different doctor. They're free to deny you as being a patient. That's part of the free market back and forth analysis. From a legal standpoint, I don't have particularly a problem with the ruling. From just a gun owner standpoint or a firearm owner standpoint, I can understand the profession that these two gentlemen are in, that's okay for them to ask those questions. And there are actually carve-outs, as was stated in the law, to cover those type of people. I think when you get into the issue of pediatricians and gun safety, I think that there are a lot of gun owners who would probably not want to answer that question and think it was none of the doctor's business as to whether they have firearms in the home, whether they keep them or not. I think one of the big issues is I don't think in medical school or residency they receive any sort of training on how to use firearms, how to store them, how to keep them safely, how to show children how to use them or not use them. So I think they might be stepping into an area that they don't particularly have a lot of knowledge or training in. So I think from a standpoint of that, it's probably not something that Second Amendment owners would appreciate being asked if they were to take their child to a pediatrician.
Okay, we'll find out about that when we come back. We're just getting started. We'll have more on the doctors and gun ownership questions coming up right after a check on our forecast. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we're discussing the recent ruling on docs versus Glocks. Doctors in Florida are now allowed to ask patients about their gun ownership. Our guests tonight are Dr. Matthew Thomas, a board-certified psychiatrist, Dr. Wes Ruffin, an emergency room physician, and Jeff Young, a Sarasota-based private attorney specializing in Second Amendment rights. So before we had Bob's weather segment, Jeff had made a statement about doctors probably not going through gun training during medical school. So I wanted to give the doctors a chance to respond about what your training is when it comes to guns.
Wow, well, good question, and you're exactly right, Jeff. No specific training on guns. We don't have any specific training on pool safety with children. We don't have any specific training on unintended children, infants, on changing tables. We don't have any specific training on decreasing the risk of SIDS. It's sort of general common sense knowledge. But we do talk about a lot of important things. We talk about a lot of risky behaviors, and we try as much as possible to use education to reduce or mitigate some of those risks. Risks related to driving, child safety seats in the back seat, just reminding parents and families about that. Pool safety. We ask about a lot of risky and risk-taking behaviors. I'm also an adolescent psychiatrist. Ask a lot about behaviors that maybe some parents are aware of or aren't aware of their teens may be engaging in. And actually, on occasion, I have found that there are some families who aren't aware that there are firearms in the home because a teenager actually brought it into the home. So in that case, I was very glad that I asked to alert the parents to that situation.
Well, I would actually respectfully disagree with both of my colleagues because as I mentioned earlier, I'm a pediatrician as well. I was trained in pediatrics. I agree that in medical school there is no formal training for these type of situations, gun safety, medication safety, that kind of thing. But in pediatrics, as part of our general pediatric training, it is incorporated into our practice. We are educated on keeping medicines out of reach of children, what types of caps are appropriate to have in the house with children, what types of, what things should be locked up, what chemicals, cleaning supplies, that kind of thing that should be locked up, and that includes guns. And we're talking about gun locks, gun safety. We're not talking about not having guns in the home particularly, although the AAP has had some statements about that particular issue. But I'm talking about our training, and our training does involve keeping all potentially dangerous items out of the reach of children and how to keep the home safe. And that is, again, part of our training.
And I've noticed since the Affordable Care Act, just getting to the question of doctors talking to their patients about personal behavioral matters, I've noticed since the Affordable Care Act, they give you a packet of paper. There's a lot, you know, it's a lot thicker now, and there are many questions on there that pertain to your behavior that, you know, may affect your health. So now, are you all required or encouraged, or what is the protocol with the Affordable Care Act as far as asking patients about some of those behaviors? Not just gun ownership, but it might be their exercise, it might be their diet, things. Is that a change since Obamacare went in?
I don't know if it's specifically a change. I think it has highlighted some of the need to sort of address a wider array of issues affecting individual patients in order to sort of manage their whole health. And so I think that's what primary care physicians are trying to do, and large healthcare organizations and hospitals try to do as well.
Yeah, I would agree that, I mean, a big focus of primary care medicine is prevention. And so keeping people healthy is a goal. So to do that, we do have to ask some of those questions that involve risky type behaviors and that kind of thing. So, but that's not a change. That's been part of primary care medicine.
Okay. And Jeff, in Ray's piece, we saw the gun shop owner talking about how he doesn't want to give medical advice, so he doesn't want doctors to give advice about guns when he's the expert on guns. So should the person selling the gun have an obligation to tell the buyer some of the safety issues involving the gun, how to store it, how to keep it away from children? Is that something that they do routinely? Well,
it depends on the store. Sometimes they will. There are federal laws in place that every time you sell a firearm, a brand new firearm, it comes with a lock in the box. It's mandated, so every new firearm that you buy has a lock in the box. Inside the box are instructions on how to use them. They have some general language disclaimers that lawyers probably put in there about how to keep them stored. But no, I mean, the gun owner isn't going to give a tutorial on everybody that comes in. I think what they think of is that we're all free individuals who have the ability to learn and read and research issues on our own. And certainly if you have a concealed weapons permit, you do have to go through a training class that teaches you a lot of those things. You have to get certified by a trainer and you have to get approved by the state. So I think that as far as learning those things, as somebody who believes in individual rights, I place that onus on the individual, not on government organizations, not on professional organizations or anything along those lines.
But do you worry there are some irresponsible gun owners who are maybe not studying up on those precautions?
Well, sure, but that's the worry about everything, whether it's irresponsible gun owners or car drivers or knife owners or whatever. I mean, you can always have a percentage of whatever group that isn't going to take seriously wearing the right football pads in a football game or whatever. So you can't create something that's going to govern the whole to deal with a few of the people that may not particularly follow the rules. And the problem with the gun issue and doctors is what was brought up. The issue isn't necessarily with local individual doctors just asking preventative questions. The issue comes when you look at some of these national organizations that most of the doctors belong to. They have come out, as was just mentioned, in support of gun control. They have policies written into their manuals and procedures that their stated goal isn't simply to worry about gun safety in the home, that it's actually to talk parents out of having guns in the home at all. There are people who have written these things that have made statements equating firearms to a disease and needing to be treated and eradicated in the same way. So when you have these national groups pushing these agendas and having these statements and policies out there, it obviously creates concern on the part of the local gun owner when they go in and the doctor is all of a sudden asking them questions that they don't think is related to their child's fever or the cough or the immunization shots that the child is getting that week. So that's where the concern comes in, not necessarily the local individual ones, but the national groups that are trying, it appears, to push a certain agenda.
And would you say you all, especially being a pediatrician, would you say that there is some kind of agenda to tell people not to own guns? Do you think that that's accurate, or?
I mean, I would agree that that's not the case, and at least individually, I can only speak to myself that that's not my goal in asking any of those questions, and that I think that it's important. We're trying to treat the patient and keep them safe. So in my practice, it's purely an individual decision.
And I imagine, I know just being a patient, the time is short that you have with patients. So getting through all these, you're probably not asking every single question every appointment.
Exactly right. And it's patient specific and obviously regionally specific. I imagine that if you're in the hills of Tennessee, most physicians probably don't ask patients if they own firearms, because the question would be is, why don't you own a gun? And so it really is going to depend. And obviously, I think here in Sarasota, probably more individuals, I'm guessing, may not be gun owners than are gun owners, but again, it's everyone's individual right. There are
although we do lead the nation in concealed weapons permits. Florida does. Yes, and coming from Texas, I was surprised to learn that when I moved here. Yes. Well, we're going to have to take a quick break, and when we return, we will have our final thoughts from our guests, plus what some of our viewers are saying about the ruling against Florida's abortion wait period. Our story from last night. We'll be right back. Welcome back. How will allowing doctors to ask about gun ownership benefit you, or is it an invasion of privacy? Our guests join us for their final thoughts. So I want each of you to just give your final thoughts on what you think about the law, it being overturned, how it could affect the patient. So Dr. Thomas, we'll start with you.
Well, the physician-patient relationship is an essential and core part of treatment for any individual. There is confidentiality already in place. It's important for the individual patient to be able to trust the physician. Obviously, it's better and enhances trust and rapport if they have shared values morals, but for the individual patient to be able to talk about important private matters. But it's also critically important for the physician to be able to ask about critically important matters and matters that the physician thinks are relevant to that patient and to that patient's well-being, including their immediate family. And in some cases, that may include questions regarding firearms.
Again, as a pediatrician and as an emergency physician, I've seen both sides of this. I've seen primary care. I've also worked in the acute care setting, and I think what's important for all patients to know is that when we're asking these questions are not designed to invade privacy or to be recorded for other people to read later on. This is something we're asking that's directly related to why you're seeing us. You may not always see the immediate reason why, but when it comes to safety, especially in pediatric situations where we're talking about children in the home, we're going to ask questions about medications. We're going to ask questions about guns and chemicals. All these are potentially dangerous objects and items that children can become or can be exposed to, and we need to emphasize the safety issues around all of those items. So the important thing is that we need to be able to ask the question, and for patients to also respect the fact that we're going to respect their privacy and keep this as part of the medical record.
All right, and then quickly, Jeff, your final thoughts.
Yeah, and as I said, from a legal standpoint, I have to agree with the ruling. I think it is their First Amendment right to ask those questions, but it's also our right to refuse to answer those. So if you're a gun owner and you don't feel trust or comfortable with your doctor because he's asking you questions that you don't want to answer, you're free to not answer it and find another doctor, and we can all move on with our lives.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. Before we go, we do want to share what some of our viewers are saying about abortion access in Florida. Earlier this month, the state Supreme Court ruled a 2015 law mandating a woman wait 24 hours after consulting with her doctor to have an abortion is unconstitutional. The law has been fought in the courts since it was signed, and the battle is expected to continue. Here's what some of you are saying about it. Angelina Vanneman writes, "It is stupid and unconstitutional. I'm tired of government acting as though women don't know what's best for themselves and their families." Tanya Gomez writes, "Killing someone hastily makes no sense. I think that if abortion is going to be legal, women should have to see an ultrasound of their child first. I would think it's harder to kill someone if you know they are alive." And Kristen Meitinger writes, "I cannot fathom how the GOP promotes small government, yet they all want to jump so far up my uterus I could almost puke them out. Stay out of my body." What do you think about doctors being able to ask about your gun ownership? If you have some thoughts on that, you can visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/news@7. And you can always watch this roundtable discussion or previous discussions on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and on Roku. And thank you to our guests for being here tonight. Dr. Matthew Thomas is a psychiatrist with First Physicians Group of Sarasota Memorial. Dr. Wes Ruffin is an emergency room physician and pediatrician with Sarasota Memorial. And Jeff Young is a private attorney in Sarasota.